Well, first of all, thank you very much, everybody, for coming to listen to me talk about some of the things that matter to me, and I think to many of us, actually, very much. You know, why does it matter how we make stuff? You know, how can we make sure that we make things with intention? Because so often it's not like that. You know, they just sort of escape projects. You know, reality is something we make, and for better or worse, our values are expressed through those projects, through the material world that we make. So I am going to start with a few places that many of us use on a daily basis, for better or worse. Non-places. Easy. Right. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. I think it answers the question of why do I do what I do? Unfortunately, it's more common than it should be. A project that we were asked to work on 5 years ago now is a classic case of that. A community kitchen, a soup kitchen, where they did an amazing job of providing 150 or so meals a day. But then, unfortunately, it came with you know, a side order of shame in terms of the environment. There's a sort of feeling often with places like this that money that's spent on the environment, on interior design, is wasted. But then we came across Massimo Bottura, who is the Michelin star chef who has a restaurant in Modena, and Michelin's, yeah, I mean, it's been in the Michelin list for 10 years, I think. And he and his wife, Lara Gilmore, also have an NGO called Food for Soul. And Food for Soul works with existing soup kitchens around the world. They've got several in Europe, but now quite a few in the US. And he feels strongly that what's missing on the menu is dignity, and is working with designers. In London, it was us, and charities that work with food waste, so squaring the circle, if you like, to make better spaces. It's fast, it's ground up, huge trust put in us, the designers. I mean, our brief was literally, make it beautiful, which is a remarkable brief because it's almost never a word that you hear in connection with social projects, so-called social projects. We had, of course, a tiny budget, although we did manage with a brief like that to call in favours left, right and centre, and pretty good favours actually. ILSE, Vitra, La Russie, Mylands, who do paint, I mean, you know, Artemidi. And also focused on the things that we thought would make a difference with that money. So, you know, maximum buck for minimum spend. So lighting, the tabletop, plants, and, of course, chairs. And Vitra were super helpful. They gave us a round of second cycle chairs from one of their restaurants. And really good chairs. The result was that. A place that people had come in and done grab and go and, you know, hung around for maybe 10 minutes, became a place that they stayed for 3 or 4 hours. It also became a place that was less scary for the people nearby. They came and did yoga classes once lunch was done. And even more remarkably, it became somewhere that corporates used in the evening. It became this sort of circular thing that built bridges that one hadn't even thought about. Talking to one of the guys who came regularly, he said, the thing is that it shows that someone cares. And it's such an obvious thing, isn't it? But it's just not the way that projects like this are usually approached. And once I was talking about it to an audience of academics, actually, in Philadelphia. And a guy said, yeah, but I mean, you know, all these people want, I mean, all they want is money or more food. I mean, you know, what is all this? And it made me really frustrated because it's absolutely not true. What's happened there is that literally a community has been created around the table with table service, with a beautiful space. These are people who are now able to look out for each other, who know each other, who spend time talking around the table. And Massimo's project goes on and on. It's now got some Rockefeller money, I believe, in the US, and is doing quite a lot of stuff on the West Coast, where it's much needed. My studio is in Bermondsey, in London, which is, you know, was at least La Bocca, probably 20 years ago, on the Thames. It was where all the people working with the boats lived. So it has a very particular character. The building that we're in is a tannery, former tannery. And before we lived there, so to speak, it was a fine arts restoration studio. So it came with a fabulous floor, which we didn't change. In fact, we tried to change as little as possible, because it's just so great, and just sort of moved in on top. As Oscar's already said, we're 15, very mixed studio, at least in terms of nationalities. And it's a workshop studio, it's not a studio office. When we're there, which is 3 days a week together, we work with materials, we work with ideas, we work with our clients. It's really a place to collaborate. The team had their monitors at home, and of course we've got some monitors in the studio if we really need to, but it's not the priority, it's not the focus. The physical reality of what we do, which you can't do online, is in the studio. The team do work 5 days a week, but they work from home. And the reality of London is that many youngsters now live miles away. You know, they just can't afford to live in London. Although I was laughed at just now because I said inflation is so bad, it's 20%. And he was going, it's 100 here. So I'm not sure it's a competition I want to enter, but it's, you know, pretty bad news for the young ones. Kitchen is certainly a focus of daily life. In addition, we have Wednesday lunch once a week with everybody, cooked for properly, so we actually get to do what Massimo does. Although we got there first, I would say. And it's really a place for thinking and doing. I mean, it's both. It's talking, but it's doing. It's the mixture, which I think is so important. I see some studios where people just sit with headphones on and are in front of their screens, and I don't think, at least, I don't see that as a way to really produce something that has character, has its own position. And there it goes again. This is the view from our window, sometimes, which is pretty great. And this is what it looks like outside. I've lived in the area for nearly 20 years, and I love it. It's a place where things have been made for more than 100 years. I mean, not just the boats, but that was before, but jam and leather and practical things. I mean, it's just got that feeling of making, which I really like. My own history is that, as you probably know, I was a journalist. I was an editor of Elle Decoration. I've been a teacher. In fact, I did a whole host of other things before I was that. I've probably done pretty much every job there was. You know, I was a cleaner, I was a cook, I was a waitress, I, you know, worked selling shoes. I've done so many jobs, which, oddly enough, has served me quite well as a designer, because I do have a sense of what it's like to be at the receiving end of what we do. But probably the thing that served me best is being a journalist. Because the tools that you learn as a journalist to interrogate, to understand, to listen, to use your eyes and be silent quite a lot of the time, to see the big picture, to ask the right questions, to connect and relate to the person or people in front of you. And imagine, what is exactly going on, what could go on. And then, above all, to be able to communicate that to your team, to your client, to the wider team, to contractors. Because projects go on for years. I mean, you know, buildings can take more than 4 years to build sometimes. So in the end, all you have is stories, all you have is words. Not just to understand the project, but to keep it alive. This is a kind of mind map. It's something that I developed when I was teaching to illustrate the connection between the personal and the universal and the interdependence of everything. Now, obviously, we can't connect with everything, but it's a tool, really, especially with the younger designers, to show how everything needs to be seen in its wider context, how all the choices need to be understood in terms of their wider context. Nothing exists on its own. Everything is connected. And in terms of our responsibility to people and to the planet, those choices need to be made with intention, with consciousness. But I don't think that being human needs to be at odds with sustainability. But we need to know what we're doing, and we need to think about it from the beginning, because it's really hard to retrofit. It is, though, why it's so important that the design process looks more like this, and the thinking, the messy stuff, the testing, the questions, the working together as a team, because of course you cannot do it on your own. Everybody has to be in it together from the beginning. All of that needs to be up front, because otherwise it looks like that. And that is always true. And the crazy thing is that when you do it this way, it's better for the budget, it's better for the team, it's better for the long-term success of the project. I mean, there's really no reason why you wouldn't. It's just that. I can't tell you how many times we open an email and it's like, we really want to work with you guys, but we want to start on site in 2 months' time. All the time. The other one that's really good is, we really want to make at home, but much cheaper. So, at home. This really is a story of a place. It was an area that, when it was built, was the dream of arts and crafts. So 1912, 1913, that kind of period, when the idea of, domestic life, the home, the elevation of everyday life was seen as a cultural thing. It was, what architects and designers aspired to. It slid slightly down the social ladder, and it's the area that it's in is called Larkstaden, not because of the birds, but because of the prostitutes. And apparently the whistling was to do with them. When our client bought this amazing building, it was actually a student information centre, and it looked like this. I mean, they'd ripped out everything. But the frame was good, the building was great, and the story of the building, when we dug in, was actually, there, hiding in the archives. So, we got our hands around it and thought about it like this, that, if you're going to have the opportunity to do something new, an old building is a really good way to go. Because, people trust it, and actually you've got tremendous freedom with an old building, much more than with a new one. I love this image because it shows, in the end, how we build realities. It was the mock-up room before we started. And a little film. Let's see if it works this time. It's on a smaller scale than most hotels, and so automatically, of course, it feels rather friendly. But the idea was very much to make a place that amplified, if you like, and enhanced the life you have when you're staying there. When we start a project, we definitely address the place. It's always looking at the particular nature of the place. So for us, it's about how to bring life to a place. That's the fundamental issue that we look at. Sometimes it's about looking into the history. Sometimes it's really just looking at the specifics of where it is right now. I don't believe in this idea of a sort of international miasma. I think the way to appeal is to have a very clear identity and sense of self. So our attitude here has been to make something that is very Swedish, but more about a Swedish perspective on the world. It's an attitude, it's a spirit, a way of looking at the world. But one of the things about it is that I think we did our job too well, because so many people afterwards said, how amazing to have discovered that old house and just put some furniture in it. It's great, isn't it? Everything was built. Everything you see was constructed. That's the problem with making reality. One of the interesting things that happened with Ethem was that it is still a small hotel, but the original, number 2, was really, relatively small footprint. And the opportunity, but also the necessity, was to have no front or back of house in terms of staff. So there's no feeling of civility. There is this feeling that they're just there, they're really good at their job when you go in, and it's fantastic. You go in through a tiny door in the gate, and it's a magic world. However, despite Stockholmers saying that they really didn't want to go up to the suburbs, because for them 20 minutes from the centre is a suburb, they did. And they really, really wanted to be able to use Ethem, which is fair enough, but it just wasn't big enough. So it became a bit of an issue. Also, we'd started with this idea of people only really wanted to stay in for sort of home cooking, so the kitchen was pretty small. But it turned out that they did want to come back every night. And so, the cooks were busy kind of preparing reindeer outside the sauna, which all got a bit weird. When next door came up, our client, Jeanette Mix, decided to go for it. But it was really a challenge, because what do you do when you had a small hotel and now it's going to double in size? And a lot of people were going, it's a disaster, it'll never work, that one. It's going to ruin everything. So our challenge then was to think, how can we make this? How can we do it? Because you don't want copy-paste, no way, but nor do you want it to be so different that it's different, or new, just for the sake of being new. But we dug into it, and one of the things that seemed very clear to us was that while the house is definitely same architecture-ish, very similar, and our design approach and values would be pretty much the same, there were subtle differences. It had bigger windows, more light, and also in the programming, the idea of this becoming a place where you could have parties, you could have birthday dinners, you could have meetings. There was a set of rooms on the first floor that, were perfect for that. So the design shifted, it evolved to accommodate that, but it still feels like it's part of the same family. Just the house next door, that's all. It's not connected to the original, apart from through a tiny hole in the garden wall. It was a hair transplant clinic before, which meant there were very interesting things under the floorboards. And this is our concept, if you like, for it. So it's more of a row of houses that are next to each other. Jeanette has since also got half of the house next door to the house next door, and that is going to be 3 apartments and a better gym. The house next door is, as I said, lovely rooms on the first floor for entertaining. Some more bedrooms, which are pretty much in the same family as the original. And then on the ground floor, a bigger kitchen, but it's still a kitchen, it's not a restaurant. But, it allows the chefs to flex their muscles, because it's also true that if you want to keep staff, you've got to go with the flow a bit. Not always, though. We did have a bit of a spat with Nicholas, the very fantastic sommelier, who, when we asked him how many bottles of wine he needed to accommodate in the restaurant, he said 10,000. And I was like, but you don't really keep that in your kitchen at home. So we had to negotiation there. And that's a gate, which uses the logo, insignia of Ethem, which actually came from a carving we found on the stairway back in the day in Ethem 2, mashed up with some embroidery on a sheet we saw in the Nordiska Museum. This is the residence lounge, the only piece that was, well, actually that's not true, there's two bits. One of the two bits that were original, the rest was completely constructed. The entertaining spaces, which obviously can be used for anything, I think they are just lovely rooms. And always a mix of new and vintage or current production pieces. We balance it, and while the budget is certainly good, it's not as good as people think. We're quite clever with the money, so we do quite a bit with joinery. The red table is one of them. Pieces that you don't necessarily see, but are nice, invisible, contemporary pieces and made by the joinery company. They're not bought. This is a space that can be changed. There's another table hidden in pieces in the cupboard, so you can fit 40 people. Personally, those sorts of rooms are my absolute nightmare, and they always look miserable. So it was really #1 challenge for us to make it feel friendly and the place that you might go in and do stuff when it was not used. And the famous kitchen. Probably one of the nicest disabled WCs that we've ever made, using tiles by Studio Glithero, a Dutch company. Really lovely. Complicated to install, but lovely. It was a bit of a challenge with the contractor. And yeah. So for us, this was really about sedimentation, about layering the idea. It was the same values, but different. You know, it's 10 years down the line. The context, the social context, the economic context is different. You know, a lot of the waiters had started growing their own vegetables outside Stockholm. It's a different world. It's also a world where you want to be able to have cultural programming, discussion, debate, where she wanted to be able to invite people from Stockholm, so it felt local and was owned by Stockholmers. So it was a really interesting development. One of the things, though, that was pretty funny was the words kicked in again. Because in the sort of final 6 months, the run-up, something weird started to happen, which is that the staff started talking about old and new. And it's like, well, in the new one, in the old one, in the new one. And we were like, hang on a minute, you know, are you going to kill your mother? I mean, in this day and age, talking about new implying it's always better and old implying that it's, you know, over is, you know, avoid those words like the plague. But we also just don't buy into it. I think the new, so to speak, one is an evolution. It's layered. It's about the same feelings. It just has different activities. So we have to start to pick our words, I think, quite carefully. Because otherwise, without knowing it, we buy into this idea that everything needs to be superseded and replaced, which shouldn't be true. How could we take some of the things we learned from Ethem and translate them to a super different context? This was a question we asked ourselves, was it possible? And we took on a project with the Anna Freud Center, which is a mental health center for kids. It's also an education center. It's also a school for difficult teenagers, and training for psychotherapists. It was a good idea, poorly executed, I have to say, on all sides. We came in too late, and it was tough. It was one of the toughest jobs we've ever done. They were moving from existing premises, different houses, which meant that none of them talked to each other. And I mean, they were dreadful, just dreadful. I mean, look at that. This is a mental health centre. I mean, everybody needed a better environment, not just the kids, and this was the therapist's cafe corner. Over 3,000 square metres, very high ambition. They actually had quite a lot of money, and they also had some very nice architects. But the money had not been prioritised, and we were brought in sort of a year or two from the end, and it was already too late, really, to turn the ship around. We've made a difference, so that's good. We talked to everybody, we talked to the therapists, we talked to the kids, we talked to the parents. We had lots of interesting insights. It was clear that there were a lot of different ambitions and none of them were aligned. So donors, for example, tend to like their names very big in brass letters, and that's where it stops. The sort of academic institution are very keen to be world-class, which is great. And certainly they have an amazing service that they offer. It's a really hardcore context. But their imagination seems to stop at foyers that look like Yale. I mean, I've actually never seen a foyer in Yale, but in their imagination it was there. On the other hand, when you talk to the kids and when you talk to the students, they wanted something that felt homely and safe, with kitchens and comfortable corners, something that would still be there when they went back. Luckily, we managed to persuade our clients that that was really important, that a terrified kid is not going to be, it is not the place to start if you're embarking on pretty intense family therapy. I mean, they won't come, basically. These were our collages of our ambition. It's not meant to be earth-shatteringly different, and nor is it meant to be brightly coloured. It's meant to feel safe and familiar. And this was the library for Sigmund Freud's books, because Anna Freud was his daughter. What happened along the way, though, is that what little money there was ran out. And that was because they discovered something nasty in the basement. It was also because they'd never really factored in interior design. The architects had thought they could do it themselves, and then once they started doing consultations, panicked and ran in the opposite direction. I mean, in our direction, actually. It was them that came to us. But unfortunately, all the money by then had been spent on air conditioning and very fancy window systems, none of which, as far as I can imagine, the kids particularly appreciated. And when they came to us again for value engineering, it had got to the point where I just said, look, at this point, just keep the broken chairs, because honestly, we can't do anything with that money. It's too little. And we managed to negotiate more money, but in that fateful meeting, the project manager said, interior design, I mean, you know, it's nice to have, but not need to have, is it? And it kind of hung there in the middle of the table, whilst the sort of psychotherapists and the CEO of the Anna Freud Centre and us were like, this is a children's mental health centre. Who's crazy? He did, you know, you could see him sort of desperately trying to kind of reel it back, but it is what he said, and it is what he thought. And I think it really highlighted to me how critical it is that interior designers and architects work together from the very beginning, because that's the only way you can safeguard the money and keep the priorities integrated and aligned. This was what happened eventually. You know, it's definitely better than it would have been. it's not as good as it could have been or should have been. Another project, also done with committees and multiple stakeholders, also done at scale, with Cathay Pacific, turned out better, but that is because we got in at the beginning. It's also because we had a champion. You know, we had the man who was prepared to fight our battles for us on the inside, and you need that. To do a big project, it's impossible to do unless you've got somebody on the other side. It was very long, and we did multiple lounges. Very male on the other side, but it was well organized, and we had a proper budget. And when the budget was cut, which inevitably it was along the way, we got together early enough on to figure out where we could make those cuts in a sensible way. The cons were that it was really tough. Oh my God. Armies of people who came and went, committees, and variable construction teams in different cities, because we did about 12 in the end. I mean, number 1 and 2 in Tokyo, Haneda, and Hong Kong. Actually 3, because we did 2 in Hong Kong. But also Kuala Lumpur, Shanghai, Vancouver, Manila, etc. I mean, you know, quite a few. Interestingly, Manila and Heathrow were neck and neck in terms of relative badness. The best, not surprisingly, was Haneda, where they were unbelievably attentive to detail, and Hong Kong was pretty good as well. This was what it was like before. That picture, God, I love that picture. Business class lounge, wouldn't you know it? Yeah. Tricky, really, especially when you're a company whose brand at the time was people, they make an airline. Unfortunately, in reality, at that point, on the ground, not in the air, the nearest thing that came to being true was in these sort of weird cardboard cutouts they had standing outside. Anyway, we won the pitch, and then we unwon the pitch. It was a very weird process. We won it, and then they panicked, because ultimately the people who run airlines are the people who keep planes in the air, which makes sense. But when it comes to choosing people to design the insides of their lounges, obviously they tend to go for people like Norman Foster. So we got to do a pilot in Haneda, and then we won it again, so that was good. But it was a very strange process. Those eyes, those interrogating eyes, those journalistic eyes came back in again, and it was fundamental to the quality of the lounge. We wanted to know really why you would even go to one, actually, bottom line, because these days it's kind of better outside a lounge. We looked at all the data, and it was like this high. Lots and lots of measurables. But not much in the unmeasurables. So we spent a lot of time in lounges. We talked to a lot of people who flew a lot. We did it ourselves even, which was kind of interesting. But we came to the conclusion that ultimately, healthy things that made you feel good emotionally, psychologically, you know, a place that you want to hang out was what was needed, not warm champagne. What was never mentioned in any of those data was that people who travel are tired. You know, they'd just come out of an air-conditioned conference room. They wanted to be cared for. You know, basically, they wanted mummy. So we gave her to them, and we made a place that really felt good. Put wood on the walls, which is super practical for all those wheelies, because paint really doesn't work in that context. These are also places that have to last for 10 years. Low maintenance is key, they don't close. But the way we managed the money was the floor is actually the one they use in DArA. Really straightforward, quite inexpensive limestone floor, but super robust, which it has to be because, you know, wheels, thousands of them, and there are thousands. I mean, 2,000 people a day go through the one in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong one was 5,000 square meters, so not small. That's why we broke it up into smaller spaces. Part of that, of course, is the first class lounge. But even that was interesting. They asked us to do the first class lounge and to make a super luxurious lounge. So we did, you know, as far as we knew what it was. But then when we did the business lounge, which was more fun, more tactile, a bit busier, all of those people who'd said they wanted to go to the exclusive lounge, and when we asked them what that meant, they said they wanted to be on their own, didn't want to be on their own. They wanted to be in the fun one. We thought about things like what it feels like being in a lounge. So, you know, how do you get privacy when there's a lot of people around you? So swivel chairs. I mean, not enough good swivel chairs around. Chairs that you can feel comfortable in, chairs where you can feel that you can slightly avert the gaze of the person next to you, of bars that felt like bars you'd go to in the city, a tea house, so it's not just about booze, and bottom line, food. We got involved in the whole food discussion because in the data it said that colossal amounts of food got wasted. It's the buffet thing. People always pile their plates with masses of food that they then don't eat. It's bad if they don't eat it, and it's bad if they do eat it. So, you know, we thought, okay, so what is it? What's the solution? And oddly enough, they already had it in their hands in this tiny little hot noodle soup kitchen in a corner of one of the existing lounges, which was, we noticed, really popular. And we thought, yeah, because it ticks the box, doesn't it? It's fresh, it's healthy, you look a person in the eye, you can have it in small portions, but you can have it twice, you know, it was a... So then we suggested it to Cathay, and they were like, no way, you know, it's not enough. And we were saying, let design help you out there, we can make it enough. And we did. And this is the one in Hong Kong, and it really works, you know, it's great, it's a great thing. The other thing that was pretty funny was, again, in the data, one of the things they said was people sleep on sofas, so no sofas. It's just like, well, people sleep because they're tired. So why don't we give them a nap room? And they were like, nap room? We thought maybe a gym. Anyway, we ended up with a nap room. And very popular it is too. To be scalable, it doesn't have to be big. One of the projects that we started, I would say, in 2000s was a relationship with Dennis Perfitis of ESOP. And we had a good friendship before we worked together. So when he started thinking about doing a store or doing stores, we said, look, you are who you are. You know, you're an intelligent, subtle person. Why, right now, would you do something that is replicated everywhere? It makes no sense. It will be out of date. You know, you're a small company. You can't afford to be redoing your stores all the time. Your values are strong enough to be visible. So why not think about your stores so in a way that means that the brief is to make your values visible, but that you give designers a free mandate, limited money, but the possibility to make a statement with that small budget, so long as it expresses your values. You know, the idea of it is possible to be, you know, different, but still the same identity, because that would give him longevity, and boy, has it. So we did the first one in Europe, in London, back in 2005, and then in 2016 we did the first one in Copenhagen, in Frederiksberg. And each store has its own story, but we always know it's ESOP. we're on the home straight. I'm aware that I haven't shown you many houses, and that's partly because people whose houses we do don't want us to show them. But I feel on safe ground here because it was in Architectural Digest with a lovely portrait of the owner, so I think we're okay. This is a couple who we worked with for a really long time, which always helps because then you really know people. We had a lot of our meetings for Et Hem because she's the owner of Et Hem, so we knew how the house operated. And it's, again, same period, another one of those Larkstaden houses, huge. But pretty uninhabitable in its former stage. They lived in the kitchen, which was tiny, and all the other big rooms were just too scary to go into, and then they had nice bedrooms. Not untypical of how these houses get lived in. They had 3 kids growing up during the period that we'd known them. So they wanted, and they're clever kids, they're sporty kids, they needed a house that really worked for them and their girlfriends. So making something that was grand but relaxed was kind of interesting. They are very aware of environmental issues. They love things comfortable and sophisticated. But he's a big investor in green steel. He's looking at how things are in the future. So there are plenty of things that would be in the traditional rule book of luxury that he wouldn't go for. The chandeliers, by the way, came with the house, so they're not his, but they're listed. So there's quite a lot of Sphinx 10 in there, who, if anybody knows about them, is a local Swedish company that was a combination of a woman called Estrid Eriksson, who started the company in the late 20s, and the remarkable designer Joseph Frank, who was an Austrian Jew who joined her in the 30s on the run from Germany. And she took him in, which was kind of extraordinary because he was in his 50s, but he did the most incredible work for her. Now the main room of the house is still the kitchen, but it's moved to a bigger room. And rather than put joinery and stuff on the frame of what is a listed house, we did a lot of cabinets. So the kitchen is in a series of cabinets. There's another cabinet on the other wall. But it feels kind of grand, but somehow of today. The only bit that is less so is his office. And he wanted that because he's, one of those kind of guys. But of course he never uses it. His son does, to play video games. And then the other kids are in the TV room next to the kitchen. It is a really beautiful house. And finally, just what you didn't expect, boats. We never saw ourselves as the kind of studio that would do a yacht. But it turned out somebody thought we were. Having said that, it was a 1938 motor yacht. And it was a super interesting project because the client wanted to get it rebuilt in the UK because he wanted to use the renovation as a way to be a patron of the skills that he felt were going in boat building in the UK. He's an obsessive sailor. And so his mission really was to use the project to sort of bring together and upgrade, I guess, boat making skills and the joinery skills that go with that. In the end, we did have to get a few people from Poland because they needed to step up a bit. But it was a super successful project. Really beautiful boat. The backstory is fabulous. I encourage you to look it up. I won't tell it to you now, but suffice to say it was built by a man in the 30s for his showgirl wife and given to her as a present. It gets better from there. But yeah, we tried to make it relaxed. It's a family boat. It needed to be somewhere where kids could hang out. It wasn't too sort of ridiculously over the top. We used a lot of rattan, because actually, on classic boats, they did. They were furnished with rattan furniture. It wasn't always wrapped around white, which is the way it is today. And we used companies that were local as far as we could. So upholstery was British, George Smith. Joinery was British. Handles were hand cast in Belgium. And the rattan came from a company called Sewn, and it's all made in the UK. So trying to sort of preserve and, if you like, irrigate those skills, because once those skills are gone, that's that. It's really hard to resuscitate them. So as much as sometimes luxury projects might seem, you know, challenging, I guess, to do, because clients are not always easy, I think that what you do have is the opportunity to support those skills and be a patron, really, of those skills and cultures that are disappearing, because otherwise, if they're not sustained, they're gone. Yeah, even the kids got a nice bunk. So, the end. Where we spend our time inside buildings, a lot of the time, certainly a lot of the time for much of the year, 87%, they say, pre-pandemic, probably more, post, in some parts of the world. It's a huge amount of our life, so it matters. I mean, these are, you know, essentially the values we aim to integrate in all our projects to some degree. The idea of a sense of place, spaces that can evolve and last, integrating those unmeasurable values. I'm obsessed by the unmeasurable values. Making the normal special, sensory, physical connection, bringing people together, making buildings healthy. And finally, last but not least, the idea of interconnectedness, that everything connects. Because this is the full quote from the title. The ultimate hidden truth of the world is it is something we make and could just as easily make differently. This is David Graeber, the fabulous writer and anthropologist.
Bueno, las expectativas están cumplidísimas con todo lo que vimos, con todo lo que escuchamos. Nos vamos muy inspirados y motivados. Se ve en el trabajo del estudio, digamos, como una normalidad, pero también una cierta sofisticación, una mezcla entre lo posible y lo aspiracional. ¿Cómo se logra ese equilibrio? Muchos de acá son decoradores, profesionales o estudiantes y quizás aspiran a lograr un equilibrio así en sus trabajos.
I mean, Gio said it best, I think. I mean, he said, never design a window without imagining a person in it. We always imagine things in use. So it is, I mean, we are all tempted to, you know, by the visual, you know, which that's one of the things that makes us human. But I think we test everything, you know, just thinking about what it would be like in use. And I think sometimes clients are in a hurry. They don't let you, you know, there isn't the time in the process. But we're really rigorous about that because small things make such a difference. I mean, one of the things that well, two things actually we didn't get to test, but one of the things that we didn't get to test in the original, in number 2, was the honing on the shower floors. Now, that might seem like a small thing. The final sample did not match our sample, but we were in London and they were in Sweden and they were in a hurry and, you know, off it went. But the reality is, it's a death trap. You put soap on it, and obviously, you can go carefully and so on, but I don't want people to feel that insecure. It's a horrible feeling to feel insecure on a floor. they've gone back and refinished the floors. And now with the recent building work at number 4, we've made absolute certain that that honing is, it's still beautiful, but it's safe. It mustn't be ugly, but that's testing. There is a fine line which is between the thing that looks fabulous and the thing that feels fabulous.
¿Y cuál sería el proyecto soñado que todavía no se le ofreció al estudio ILSE?
Honestly, I think every project is the dream project, because one of the fantastic things about being a designer is you can dream. Every project gives you a new story to dream about and to try and solve and understand. It's an extraordinary profession because you get this sort of thing, that unsolvable thing that lands on your lap, and then you start to solve it. It's completely obsessive, I have to say. It's an amazing profession.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, un honor enorme tenerlos a todos acá. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And sorry about the technical at the beginning.